Hi, I'm Rigger. This is You Are Right, and welcome to Resemblance, where we adapt existing characters into RWBY. We're in the midst of a little Christmas special where I'm assembling Team Gift, a holiday squad of Huntsmen in training from a bunch of classic Christmas characters. We've already created the leader of the squad, Glade Finch, the would-be Grinch. Before we get started, be sure to like the video if you like it, share it if you think others would like it, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. Also, if you didn't catch it last year, be sure to check out my previous Christmas special where I wrote a possible origin story for Christmas in the world of Remnant, link here in the description and at the end cards. Now, on to today's video where we're making the second member of the team. Good work to those who guessed it, because it is the absolute classic character of Ebenezer Scrooge from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. If you didn't catch episode 1, I explained more details about how this all works there, so please go check it out. But if you want a quick summary, I put all of these characters at about 18 years old, second year Huntsman in training, and they're on the side of good, so no matter who they are, we're going to try and adapt them to that. So yep, Scrooge is a good guy. So is the Grinch. Part of our goal is to make it work. But let's move from here to the all-important resemblance card. So, just as before, we're going to go down the list and fill this out until we have a complete character. I'm going to say before we start, first up, this is less one-to-one than the Grinch. We're throwing in a bit more flavour and changing things up a little bit more for this adaptation just to keep it interesting. However, there's no place to start like the start, so first up is his name, and immediately things got interesting. Scrooge only really has two colours, and that's a big black overcoat and his sheet white nightgown. There is a perfect name for Mr. Ebenezer, but I couldn't really give it to him because it didn't really fit with the rest of his character. Or so I thought. With the name Ebenezer and one of his primary colours being black, I thought I had to use Ebony. But Ebony is a feminine name. It's not even like Blake, or it can be either way. I'm not sure I know of any masculine use of the name Ebony, so I felt like I couldn't give it to him, right? I had already decided I wanted the character to be male, so it didn't seem to fit, and I thought, okay, that's fine, I'll just make it his last name, that's perfectly fine. But then I needed an I to make Team Gift. I mean, I could just call him Ebony Rouge, but that doesn't fit the name scheme, and, you know, it's a bit on the nose, and there's no red in his design, so, yeah. Then when I was thinking about the colour white, the only things that come to mind with that, with the letter I, is Ivory. And I'm not calling him Ivory Ebony, that's just silly. But then I struck gold. And I actually almost named him after gold too with the whole money thing, but no. Everyone remembers Scrooge as Scrooge. No one remembers Ebenezer, no one remembers his first name, he is Scrooge. That name lived on, and I think that might actually play into his character's motivation, which will become clearer later. So I think his first name is Ebony, and he hates it. He finds it a feminine name, but he's a very masculine character. Let's play that into his character. And by that same merit, he doesn't like using his first name. He doesn't use it. Already, that creates a little complex for him, something for the character to play off. Then we still need an I, and for his last name to be done with black, well, that's pretty easy. I immediately went to words with ink. Inkwood, inkjet, etc. But Scrooge was a bookkeeper, or perhaps some kind of loans dealer, it's not exactly clear, it's hard to say. But he worked in keeping records in finance and bookwork. So I really like the name Inkwell. I mean, we already have Ironwood, so I didn't want to do Inkwood. We'll do Inkwell, like with a quill. So, Ebony Inkwell. But I think he just goes by Ink. Not Inkwell like you're addressing someone by their last name like you would perhaps a soldier, but just Ink. It's like a nickname, it's a given name that he uses to introduce himself. I think that really works. And of course it plays into how Scrooge was perceived with that inky black soul, that black heart that everyone thought he had. And you could even later down the line make his first name into a plot point, that perhaps he gives someone permission to use it, or he talks about it. That's something you could do with his character to progress him later. So we'll call that the name. Next we'll go down to age, and we'll use 18, and I'm putting the pronouns here because they fit better, and yeah, he's using he and him. Next is height. Okay, so we're adapting, but not everything is one-to-one. I'll let you know this deviates a fair bit from what you expect Scrooge to be, which is good. It shouldn't be the exact same, or there's no point in doing this, I'm just then describing Scrooge. So, it'll become clearer why later, but this Scrooge is tall. He's 6'4". I mean, he's not what some RWBY characters are, where they're incredibly tall, but he's a big guy. The next one on the list is weapon. So this one's interesting because it's pretty weird. I made a bit of a unique weapon. So we'll go to the weapon workshop. Okay, so here I'll just say up front, I want to make Scrooge a bruiser. It stuck out to me as a fun concept for someone like Scrooge who is adapted from, you know, an old frail man. No, he's a heavy. But I didn't want him to have a normal heavy weapon. I wanted him to have something unique and make it his own. I took a few different inspirations here. Of course, I wanted to pull from his story, so this is what I put together, because the only object Scrooge is really seen with is a candle and cane, and we have a cane. It's not great, so let's find something really different. So Scrooge is an awful boss. He works his employees extremely hard. So I thought a whip would be fitting, right? You know, cracking the whip at his employees metaphorically. But a whip is a hard weapon for a heavy to have. It's not really a destructive weapon or a big heavy weapon. Then I thought more than a whip, it could be a cat o' nine tails made for punishment. The dark symbolism speaks for itself, but yeah, that's something more unique than a whip. But A, it still doesn't fit a bruiser, and B, it's not supposed to get kinky. So I thought more into the story, and there's one character everyone sort of forgets, but it does have an iconic symbolism, and that's Jacob Marley, the first ghost. Not the first of the three, the fourth ghost, the first one who appears to Scrooge to warn him what's about to happen, Scrooge's old business partner. And Jacob Marley is wrapped in chains as punishment for his life. Now, I like that. So let's apply backwards. What about a chain whip? But unlike Sienna's chain rope dart, this is heavy, like a biker chain, and like 9 of them, so fling around that much weight, when it's whipped about with force, it near cuts you in half with the weight of it. Especially Grim, whatever they're made of. Imagine a big heavy guy with a big bunch of chain just whipping it down onto a Grim and it slices right through. That's a pretty cool image. Then I thought more about how to be stored, and I admit, this weapon doesn't make sense. The physics aren't here, they wouldn't fit in its container. But it's RWBY, I mean, Coco's weapon equally bends, physics, so it doesn't really matter that much, I hope. But here's what I came up with. Okay, so it's a very odd looking. And as you can see for clarity on the drawing, I could only fit 6 chains, not 9, but 6 is fine. You get the idea. It has a either single chain mode or a lot of chain mode. I added some blades to the tips for slashing as well as grappling, so we can use it like a whip, so that might be his landing strategy, that kind of thing, and swinging and utility and all of that. I do also want to point out that his hands are pretty big, so it's probably bigger than you're thinking it is by a little bit. But as for why it looks like it does, it's actually a reference to another ghost. The chains are Jacob Marley, but the actual handle itself is more like the big torch the Ghost of Christmas Present is usually displayed with. Sometimes that's more of a horn shape, other times it's more of a goblet-y shape, and this is more like a goblet, which also fits the Ghost of Christmas Present with his themes of like feasting and joy. So, the chains are controlled with the trigger, as you can see, so different combinations of how you pull that trigger changes how things work, and it's reversible. Rather than a transforming weapon, I thought about one you flip. And I'm not going to actually flip it on the screen because you can easily see what it is, and I'm hoping YouTube hasn't destroyed me already for what is clearly a firearm. But I thought that was interesting. So it's like a big melee weapon he can swing at you and then retract the chains and flip it in his hand and yeah, use it as a firearm. As for how it's loaded, because it wouldn't make sense to load from the bottom because that's where the chains are, it actually loads from top down, so the entire magazine slides down through the top. Which, you can tell me that wouldn't work either, but it's fantasy, so don't worry about it. Also, it's worth noting that despite having not too many rounds in it, it's actually 3-round burst rather than single fire, because it's not really designed to take things down. It's more designed for cover fire, for making your enemies get into cover, or for just provoking something to come towards you, because he wants to do things hand to hand as much as possible. So just spraying it so everyone gets down and he can move is really the intention. Then he can use the capabilities of the whip to perhaps grab something and pull it towards him, or swing himself somewhere, and then once he's up close, you're a goner. Also, he has a neat way of using the chain as well, which is he may grab the end, avoiding the blade, like wrap it around his hand, and use that length of chain between his hands as a blocking mechanism, to block something like a sword coming in. Using it along the lines of rope fighting. Also, because of its weight, that big handle in his hands makes his fist basically loaded, so if he punches you with that, it's gonna really do some damage. As for dueling, because he does want to be the best huntsman, it's actually quite easy to disarm people with that heavy chain. Because if you have, say, a sword, if he swings the full lengths of all those chains at you at once with weight and force, he uses all that impact to wrap around blades and push weapons out of people's hands and disarm people quite quickly. Because it's not like a solid blade you can block with your blade and it stops it, it's a big heavy weight of chain that swings down and wraps around and pushes. It's also all gold colored because I did want a reference to like gold and money, and it also stands out against the rest of his design, so it just makes it pop. And again, it's similar to the Ghost of Christmas Present's torch, which is usually bright and blinding. And of course, it needs a name, and I'm not going to call it Bah Humbug because that's just too easy. So I'm actually going to call it Impetus. Why? Well, because impetus is a force that makes things happen. And that's what this is for him. It is a force to make change. It is the force he will use to make things happen. It's a mix of certain things, because the whip is a horrible motivator that's been used for a long time by bad people, and the chains on Marley represent a weight of his sins, and he was there to tell Scrooge that he had to change before it was too late. And then the ghosts step in as Scrooge's impetus to get him to change, a force to make him change, a force to make things move. So that's what the weapon is. It's Ink's force with which he will change things. Okay, so that's done. Back to the card. Okay, so back to the card. Next is aura color, and I'm actually going to make it white. I know it should be black, his whole thing is black, but his soul color is actually white, which is also ghostly as well. Next is his semblance, and well, I had to. But how it works is interesting. His semblance is called Phantoms, because I couldn't call it Ghost, that's just too low effort. Now, there's lots of different apparition semblances like Blake's and Sun's and Flint, so we have a precedent, we're just going to have to make a variation on it on how his works specifically. And fitting him, it's a combat semblance. What it does is it summons up to 3 copies of him that all look exactly like him, so more like Flint's in that way. Except, specifically, his can't hurt you. Flint's increases his power, this does not. However, he can keep them up for longer. Basically, he summons 3 copies of himself, but there's a little trickery. When they split into 4, the 3 copies in himself, he kind of picks which one he slides into, making it impossible to know which of the 4 is him. Then, they all move with him at once in sync and attack. In a duel, suddenly you're facing 4 people attacking you at the same time with heavy chains, and you have to pick the right one to block. Your chances are low. It's almost cheating. So, it's Flint's crossed with some Neo trickery almost. The ghosts are harmless constructs, and when you strike them, you go right through them and destroy them. They basically have like 1 hit point. So, you have a whip-like weapon that can sweep through them all, you'll be fine, because you'll cut through them all and hit the real guy. But that's a very specific circumstance. It's almost like the weapon he uses is the best one to use against him. There are definitely counters to this, but it is also very strong. They do disappear, and it does drain aura to keep them up and to make more. However, as the story progresses and as he grows as a character and gets better, that would be one of the things you would improve on, is how he uses them. So, to start out, he might split into 4 and run at you, and then you have to pick which of the 4, but it can be done. Later, he might run at you just as himself, and at the last second as he's swinging split into 4, and suddenly you have no time to react and pick the right one. In that way, it's very much like what Emerald was doing when they were in Haven, except he can just do it himself. But it does have one little speciality, and that is the best bit about it for being a Huntsman, that these actually work on Grimm. Because they are physically there with basically 1 hit point, they actually reflect his soul and emotions. So Grimm can't tell the difference. It looks like 4 people that all have the exact same emotion, but they can't discern the difference in that. So it makes it great for battling Grimm, who suddenly have to pick a 1 in 4 target, making it quite easy to take them down when they have to split where their focus is. That's actually the trade-off for them being physical and you being able to destroy them, is you get this extra bonus that it works on Grimm because they register as actually being there. So someone like Penny, who can see body heat, wouldn't be fooled. But for everyone else, including Grimm, it's incredibly hard to tell which is which. Even aura sensing abilities will actually feel 4 individuals. They'll all be exactly the same, but you feel like there's 4 of them there. But he can't have it out all the time. He's somewhere between Flint and Blake. Flint can't use his much, but he actually gets to hit you, and Blake uses hers all the time, but she only gets 1. So, somewhere in the middle. But also, I'll add, he is a strong aura user. He is a combat specialist, which brings us to his skills. So what are his skills? Like I said, he's a combat build for sure. So first is melee combat, and he's very, very good at it. Like, really good. He's notably great at fighting, and that also extends into hand-to-hand. He absolutely does not need a weapon to wreck you. And of course, strength goes with that. If you have a heavy obstacle, it's no longer an obstacle. Also, aura. He's well versed in using it and fueling his semblance. He's a fighter. Endurance. He's an athlete and he doesn't quit. He has a never say die attitude. He's also great at analytics. He does have a brain in there. Scrooge was a bookkeeper. He's good at numbers and calculation. And that actually continues into academia. He's not a meathead. It does come from Scrooge. He's quite smart. He is really great at this. As you can see, he's a combat build. The things he's good at are fighting and learning, especially about fighting. Now onto his flaws, and the first is ambition. He has lofty goals and will not settle for less. Again, an adaptation of Scrooge. Rather than just monetary greed, he wants the world. He wants it all. That's how I adapted it. Rather than just, oh, he's only motivated by money and creating like a mercenary, sure, you could do that route, but I wanted something a little more interesting. That's a little bland. So rather than it just being about greed for money, he does have that, but just being about money, he instead wants a lot more. He has these grand ambitions and he won't stop until he gets them. He has greed for far more than money. And to follow with that, he also has a very strong sense of pride. Just like Scrooge, he is set in his ways and sure of what he is doing, until in that story something comes to change him. He has that single-mindedness. And next to go along with that as well is rage. He has a temper if you set him off. And can you see what I'm doing yet with these flaws? See what other character sort of style I modeled this off for a more combat-oriented show? Because there's no point in hiding it. His personality will be quite different, but Scrooge's greed and relentless approach to work and his grouchy personality means I adapted it over into a combat build with amazing work ethic and giant pride and rage issues on top of it. If you're thinking Vegeta or Bakugo, you're on exactly the right path here. They're exceptional and they want more. And just like with those two, another flaw he has in line with them is overconfidence. He deserves to be confident because he is great, but he puts himself on that pedestal, so backing down is something he does not do. And last is greed. He does want money. He wants to be successful, but there's more to it than that. We'll get to it when we get over to his personality and goals, etc., the right side of the card. Next up, the middle part of the card, the character design. There's no point putting it off, let's do it. 3, 2, 1, show me the money. Ooh, okay, that's probably not what you expected. Okay, so Scrooge's description is usually that he's like thin and old and withering and, fading away. But given how he adapted his traits, that wouldn't make sense. So no, he's a big strong boy. Starting at the bottom, we have these knee-high black boots with the armor plates on the shins and the knees. The big black boots are more in line with actual Scrooge, just what they would wear in England at that time, with all the rain and how horrible things were, but it speaks more to the no-nonsense combat build, and the armor does as well. This guy is a fighter, and he actually does wear armor, unlike the Grinch. Overall, we see the black and white color scheme, which speaks a lot to the character, his duality, dominated over by black, but perhaps with some white underneath. There is good in there. That's sort of why I made his aura color white. Not only when he uses it you get sort of 3 ghosts for a second, but also his soul isn't black as much as he's sort of putting on that it is, or you might interpret that it is. But above the knees we have some martial arts like baggy pants that are then stuffed into the boots. This gives a bit of a comfortable look, a bit like pajamas, since I couldn't really give him the big white nightgown, but he does have white underneath. And I did give him a big black jacket, but instead of like a trench coat, it's more like a martial arts robe. Instead of a high collar, I adapted it into the half face covering, ninja-y look, just to be a little edgy and to create some separation from his face, since it's hard to get through to him, he has like a wall separating him emotionally. The coat is lopsided a bit, in that RWBY asymmetry style, which is why he has one upper arm plate as well. But it also plays into a duality because if you look at the whole design, there's a hint at like a yin and yang thing, which does also fit in line with his more martial arts and eastern stylings. The upward silver and white shoulder curve of the plate and the lower swoop of the coat. We have a cut-off sleeves look for beefy arms and shoulders, and we have armor on the wrists too, which is good for blocking since he doesn't have like a blade. So he uses those gauntlets in conjunction with the solid metal handle of his weapon to be a blocking system for him when he doesn't have time to grab the chain and make a chain line. But my favorite thing about this whole design is his hair, adapting that white nightcap, because Scrooge is often shown with a top hat, but I didn't really think that fit here, but the nightcap's pretty recognizable, and I'm guessing is how anyone guessed that it's Scrooge. So, the shaved sides looked with the flopped over hair and comes together in almost a side ponytail on the side of his head. It has a interesting, original, good look to it, and it actually kinda works. The last thing here that you might think is weird is his eyes. I know they probably should be black or brown or dark, but the book only really describes them as red from like the cold and being old, but we already have a red-eyed character in the Grinch whose eyes are actually described as red, and I thought for this it would be interesting to have a cold blue. because it could both be piercing and cold and mean, or show a softer side, given the expression he uses. It's one bit of colour that breaks up his whole design. The eyes are the windows to the soul, and I thought it might be interesting if there was just a colour there that popped. And lastly, we have to talk about the big chest plate. So again, combat build, he does wear armour. And you could ask how he bends over, and I'd say shut up. No, but there is also actually a metaphor to the chest plate as well, that literally his heart is behind steel. His real emotions are armoured and hard to get to. But that's it for the design, let's go on to the character. So, personality. So, to adapt his greed for wealth and hard working into a fighter, we have this core belief that he is deserving of being the best, and as such, he takes on all challenges. If you want to fight him, he's happy to oblige, he'll spar with anybody. But there is a form of monetary greed here too, because he sees money as a measure of skill and standing. That's why he wants money. Yes, money is useful, but the more money you have, the more successful you are, and he wants to be the most successful. So in a way, his self-value is tied to money, because what he values is being the best, and the best earns the most money. It's a show of how good you are. Also, we've talked about how he has a big ego and pride, and those do get him in trouble a lot. But it's also discussed that he has very impressive combat skills, so he solves that problem too. He may get into a lot of fights, but he also usually wins. That itself is an adaptation of how hard Scrooge is to get through to, and how he does not care how this comes off to others. He has his drive. His wealth and power means you should give him respect. It's the same here. His literal ability and literal power means you should respect him, or so he thinks. Otherwise, he's quiet and dismissive. He's not much for conversation, he doesn't talk much at all. And seemingly, he has no sense of humour. You won't see him laugh. Like Scrooge. No unnecessary talking, not a nice guy to be around, or at least it comes off that way. He is all business, and his business is being a huntsman. Now on to goals and allegiances. So goals we've covered, he wishes to be the strongest huntsman, but also to get any other accolade he can, including he wants to win the Vital Festival. He wants everything that would give him status, and that includes wealth as mentioned as well. But that keeps his goals aligned with good. To be the best huntsman, you need to be the best at beating Grim, the best at saving people, the best at everything. So that all goes with it, and that keeps him on the side of good. So despite him wanting money, the bad guys couldn't pay him to be bad because he wants to be the best, and it'll come out of his background as to why. It's also worth mentioning that while he's very hard to get to, he can form actual bonds, and he forms those bonds with worthy challengers or those who show appreciation for his strength and skill. He likes strong opponents and people who are up to his level to train with so he can get better because he wants to be better than everyone, or those who actually see him and value him for his achievements and skill, rather than try and change him. Don't say he shouldn't do what he's doing because you're not going to change his mind. Don't say he's misguided. You respect him for how good he actually is at this, and if you value him that way, he will respect you. Now, in the actual stories, yeah, the ghosts do ultimately change him, but the general public are not the ghosts in his story. Normal people don't get through to him like that. He doesn't accept people who try and do that generally. The general public are not the ghosts of his story, so they're not going to be able to change him, so this is how it is. Just like when normal people tried to make Scrooge change, you'd only get anger and a bad reaction. Now, background. So, I'm having him born in Mistral, only because it doesn't really matter where he's born, really, and this team is shaping up to attend Haven, so it might as well be Mistral. Plus, he has a little Eastern-inspired martial arts gear, kinda like Ren, so kinda fits, or at least on anima. So let's figure out why he's like this. Rather than make it that he has no family and knows Scrooge was old and bitter, let's make it that he has a very hard family instead, that have the same values as he does. He was brought up that way. So he's the youngest of 4 brothers, again so there's 3 around him like ghosts, and it gives him that youngest child ambition to stand out. So he grew up fighting for his place in the family, and that means quite literally, he wants to earn the respect of his family, and his family has a huntress mother and a dead father who is probably also a huntsman. And their mother raises them this way, to be hard. They live in basically a dojo. You have to be strong, you have to be a fighter, so you don't die like your father, and, not that the father was bad, that it was a noble thing he did. This is what you aspire to. So in the story, more than money, this is Scrooge's wealth. This is what he wants more than anything and what he wants to hold on to. It's all business, it's the family business. To be the best huntsman. Brought up by his hard-as-nails mother, basically to fight from the first day he was born. and to say that his father's death was noble and that's the best you could ask for is that if you're not the best, you die in service to being a huntsman. And as the youngest, he actually ended up being the best. He could beat his brothers in a fight. He cannot beat his mother though. So his ultimate goal, as a sign of respect and appreciation to his mother for everything she's given him, because he does love his family, is he wants to surpass her and everyone else, to say that she raised the best. Her teaching and instruction will have birthed the best huntsman, because that gives a kind of warm heart to the seemingly cold, ambitious guy. It's not just selfish pride, there is heart at the core of it if you understand it. And lastly, we'll do some quirks. So this is fun. I want to put in here, he likes movies, just because everyone needs downtime, so give him something. As someone who is often alone with his brothers while their mother was away doing huntsman work, that's something they could share and bond over without fighting over, because it's just something you watch rather than like a game. He's a total combat specialist, so he gets annoyed by fake action in movies, so he actually doesn't like action movies despite what you'd think of him given his personality. That's just an interesting thing to throw in. So because of that, let's make it something fun, that he actually secretly really likes romance movies, and he does deep down wish for a deeper human connection. See, that's a good wrinkle to his character, that really deep down, he does want, say, a relationship. He would never say that out loud or admit it to himself. This is an adaptation of that family spirit that changes Scrooge in the end. That kind of warmth that he doesn't really have, that thing that touches the heart. Despite loving his family and his mother, he was never raised in a warm, loving environment. They were raised to be hard and strong, and they were successful at that, and he loves his family. He does all this in their name, but he doesn't have that warmth with someone else. That real feeling of companionship and compassion. It's just something he doesn't experience, he's never experienced. So deep down he does kind of want that, but is locked inside quite a rough exterior. And I think it's why he might even be fascinated with romantic movies and stories, because it's just simply emotions and situations he's never had anything like. He probably doesn't know how to express those emotions at all. It's almost like he's watching these to educate himself and learn this side of his personality that isn't there. But even if it's not romantic, and it probably will end up not being, it's like it is in Scrooge, that warmth of family, that connection. And that's his lifeline. There can be a Tiny Tim and Cratchit family for him. There can be special people that affect his heart, but it has to be very special people. And guess what? He does have 3 teammates around him too, so in story it'll likely be them eventually that change his heart. Though if it's through a romantic connection with someone, or simply being that warm family dynamic, who can say? And lastly, he's a combat geek, just something to put in there because he doesn't speak much, but if you get talking about fighting, you might get him involved. He's a strong silent type, but when it comes to combat, he'll nerd out about it, he'll talk about fighting forever. So if he's to find friendships or companionship outside of his team, it'll likely be through that avenue, someone talking about fighting and he can't help but get involved. Anyway, there it is, Ebony Inkwell. There's our Scrooge. There's a little more adaptation here than last time, adding in this whole combat element, but if you say that Scrooge is all business, but here that business and family business is being a huntsman, you get this new direction, which I think is pretty interesting. It adds a lot more to his character than just greed for money, which he still has, but it's along lines that make sense, and it gives a family core to everything, because at the end of the day, that was from Scrooge's story in the end. The second member of Team Gift is complete. What do you think of Ink? This team dynamic so far has some tough people with hard backgrounds, but you can see why it works so far, because Glade is someone who sees the value in people as a schemer. He likes to know his assets and have good ones, meaning he very much respects and sees the value of Ink's abilities. And Ink likes Glade because he respects people who value his skills and give him the respect he feels he deserves, which Glade does. So Glade plans the best way to point the weapon that is Ink, and then Ink being the weapon goes in and solves the problem. That sounds like an effective team to me. And be sure to like the video if you like it, and please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Until next time, my name is Rigger. I hope you have a wonderful holidays, and I hope I did alright.